grizzly attack is not a tale of evil, but of instinct meeting intrusion. These giants of the wild move with quiet authority, but when provoked or surprised, their response is immediate and overwhelming. Each strike is a defense, not a hunt, an ancient reflex triggered by fear or protection. Survivors often speak of the eerie silence before the storm, a moment where time holds its breath. To truly understand a grizzly attack is to accept that in the wild, survival depends not on strength, but on humility and respect for unseen boundaries. In the remote backcountry of Montana's Bitterroot Range, a 2018 hunting expedition turned into a harrowing battle for survival that would forever change the lives of Jason Walker, 42, and Daniel Roberts, 38. The region, known for its rugged wilderness and diverse wildlife, had experienced an increase in bear activity that year due to a particularly harsh winter followed by a late spring, forcing many animals to venture further in search of food. The two experienced hunters had been friends since their college days at State University. Jason, a construction contractor from Missoula with 15 years of hunting experience, and Daniel, a wildlife photographer who had recently moved back to Montana after a decade in Seattle, had planned this trip for months. Both were well-versed in wilderness safety and carried bear spray along with their hunting rifles as precautionary measures. On the crisp morning of October 14th, they set out before dawn, hoping to track elk through the densely wooded valley. The area they had chosen was remote, approximately 23 miles from the nearest ranger station, and required a 2-day hike to reach their base camp. This isolation, while perfect for hunting, would later prove nearly fatal. Around mid-morning, as they traversed a rocky ridge overlooking a small creek, Daniel spotted fresh bear tracks in the soft mud near the water's edge. The prints were massive, suggesting a large male grizzly, likely weighing around 800 pounds based on the depth and size of the impressions. The hunters immediately became more vigilant, frequently scanning their surroundings and making noise to avoid surprising any wildlife. Despite their precautions, fate had other plans. As they rounded a dense thicket of pines, they came face to face with the massive grizzly, merely 40 feet away. The bear, apparently defending a recently killed elk hidden in the brush, rose to its full height of nearly 9 feet and released a deafening roar that echoed through the valley. Jason later reported that time seemed to slow in that moment. The bear's breath was visible in the cold mountain air, its amber eyes locked on them with primal intensity. Daniel slowly reached for his bear spray while Jason carefully raised his rifle, hoping to fire a warning shot to scare the animal away. Before either man could react fully, the grizzly dropped to all fours and charged. Jason fired 3 quick shots, each hitting the bear in the shoulder and chest area. Daniel managed to deploy his bear spray, but the wind direction minimized its effectiveness. The bear, though visibly wounded with blood matting its thick brown fur, continued its charge with remarkable ferocity. At the last moment, the injured animal veered away, disappearing into the dense forest. The hunters, hearts pounding and adrenaline surging, quickly reloaded and began a cautious retreat back toward their camp. What they didn't realize was that the wounded grizzly, displaying the cunning intelligence for which these animals are known, had circled behind them. 20 minutes later, as they crossed a small clearing, the bear launched a surprise attack from behind a large boulder. This time there was no warning. The grizzly slammed into Daniel from behind, sending him crashing face first into the rocky ground. Jason immediately fired 2 more shots into the bear's hide, causing it to release Daniel and turn its attention toward him momentarily. In the crucial seconds that followed, Daniel managed to roll away and retrieve his fallen rifle. The bear, now just 15 feet from Jason, charged again. Jason fired twice more, and Daniel, though bleeding from deep lacerations on his back, managed to get off 2 additional shots. In total, 9 rifle rounds had struck the massive animal. Yet somehow, defying all odds and the significant blood loss from its multiple wounds, the grizzly continued its assault. It swiped at Jason, catching his left arm and tearing through his heavy hunting jacket, leaving 4 deep gashes from elbow to wrist. The force of the blow knocked Jason against a tree, temporarily stunning him. Daniel later described that the bear, though gravely wounded and moving with obvious difficulty, made 2 more charges before finally retreating into the forest, leaving a heavy trail of blood behind it. The entire encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but would leave both men with lifelong physical and psychological scars. Using their satellite phone, they managed to call for emergency assistance. Given their remote location, it took rescue personnel nearly 7 hours to reach them by helicopter. Both men required immediate medical attention. Jason for the severe lacerations on his arm that had damaged tendons and muscle tissue, and Daniel for puncture wounds and a dislocated shoulder from the initial impact. During their recovery at the hospital in Missoula, Wildlife officials tracked the wounded bear and found it dead, approximately 1 mile from the attack site. A later examination revealed that 7 of the 9 bullets had hit vital organs, yet the animal had continued fighting, a testament to the incredible resilience of these apex predators. The incident became widely discussed in hunting circles across Montana and neighboring states, serving as a powerful reminder of the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters and the importance of proper preparation when venturing into grizzly territory. For Jason and Daniel, the experience fundamentally changed their approach to hunting. They continued their annual expeditions but implemented additional safety protocols and always hunted in larger groups. 5 years after the attack, Jason established a wilderness safety training program for novice hunters, using his experience to educate others about wildlife awareness and emergency response in remote areas. Daniel's photographs of their injuries and the recovered bear became important educational tools in these workshops, bringing the vivid reality of the potential dangers of the wild to life. The encounter entered local folklore as one of the most extraordinary examples of a grizzly's determination and capacity to withstand injury when defending its territory, and as a sobering reminder of human vulnerability in the face of nature's most formidable predators. The Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana had long been revered for their pristine beauty and challenging terrain. In 2013, these majestic peaks became the setting for a life-altering encounter between man and nature that would test the limits of human endurance. Caleb Thomason, a 27-year-old environmental scientist from Portland, Oregon, had been planning his solo backpacking trip through this remote wilderness for months, meticulously mapping routes and preparing supplies for what he hoped would be a rejuvenating 2-week adventure. The Bitterroot Range, part of the larger Rocky Mountain system, had historically served as critical habitat for numerous species, including the formidable grizzly bear. Although grizzly populations had declined significantly during the 20th century, conservation efforts had led to a gradual recovery, with approximately 1,800 bears inhabiting the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and adjacent mountain ranges by 2013. Caleb's journey began uneventfully. For 4 days, he hiked through sprawling alpine meadows and dense pine forests, carefully documenting plant species and signs of wildlife in his journal. An experienced outdoorsman with numerous solo expeditions under his belt, Caleb carried bear spray. He followed proper protocols, including making noise while hiking and storing food in bear-resistant containers suspended from trees away from his campsite. On the morning of August 17th, the 5th day of his expedition, Caleb was traversing a narrow trail that wound alongside a small mountain stream. The area was known locally as Huckleberry Ridge due to the abundant berry patches that thrived in the sunny clearings between stands of lodgepole pine. These same berries that attracted hikers seeking natural trail snacks also drew hungry bears preparing for winter hibernation. As Caleb rounded a sharp bend in the trail, his worst nightmare materialized before him. A massive grizzly bear, later estimated to weigh approximately 600 pounds, stood just 20 yards ahead, actively feeding on a particularly productive berry patch. The encounter gave Caleb almost no time to react properly. The bear, startled by the sudden human presence in its feeding area, immediately displayed signs of agitation, ears flattened back, shoulders hunched, and head swaying side to side. Caleb later recalled to park rangers that he attempted to back away slowly, speaking in low, calm tones, as recommended in wilderness training. However, the narrow trail was bordered by loose scree slopes, and as he cautiously retreated, his boot dislodged several small rocks that clattered down the incline. The sudden noise appeared to trigger the bear's defensive instincts. In an instant, the massive animal charged. Caleb attempted to deploy his bear spray, but in his haste to retreat, his foot caught on an exposed tree root, sending him tumbling backward onto the rocky trail. By the time he regained his orientation, the grizzly was upon him. With one powerful swipe, the bear's claws tore through Caleb's hiking pants and into his right thigh, leaving 4 deep lacerations. As the animal loomed over him, Caleb made the split-second decision to employ the survival technique he had learned years before. He curled into a protective ball, hands clasped behind his neck, and remained still. The grizzly bit down on his left shoulder, the pressure crushing but thankfully not breaking bones. For what Caleb later described as the longest 60 seconds of my life, the bear continued its assault, delivering additional bites to his backpack and right arm. Then, as suddenly as the attack began, it stopped. The grizzly stood over Caleb's motionless form, sniffing intensely. Blood from Caleb's wounds saturated his clothing, but he maintained perfect stillness, barely allowing himself to breathe. After what seemed an eternity, the bear slowly backed away, continuing to watch him intently before finally turning and disappearing into the dense forest undergrowth. Caleb remained motionless for an additional 10 minutes, fearing the bear might return. When he finally dared to move, the extent of his injuries became apparent. The lacerations on his thigh were deep, his shoulder showed puncture wounds from the bear's teeth, and his right forearm had sustained significant tissue damage. Despite the trauma and blood loss, he maintained consciousness and reached for his emergency satellite communicator, activating the SOS function that would alert authorities to his position and predicament. For 3 agonizing hours, Caleb applied pressure to his wounds using items from his first aid kit while waiting for rescue. Throughout this time, he remained vigilant, fearful that the blood scent might draw the bear back to his location. Using his remaining strength, he dragged himself to a more defensible position against a large boulder, keeping his bear spray ready. A search and rescue helicopter from Missoula County finally reached his location late that afternoon. The medical team stabilized his condition before airlifting him to a hospital, where he underwent 7 hours of surgery to repair damaged blood vessels, muscles, and tissue. During his recovery, Caleb worked with wildlife officials to document the encounter. Based on his description and hair samples collected from his clothing, biologists identified the bear as a female grizzly that had been previously tagged during population studies. The attack was classified as defensive, triggered by the bear's proximity to a valued food source, and exacerbated by the element of surprise in their meeting. Rather than harboring resentment toward the animal that nearly took his life, Caleb channeled his experience into advocacy for wilderness conservation and proper bear country safety protocols. 6 months after the attack, still undergoing physical therapy for his injuries, he began giving presentations at outdoor recreation stores and conservation events, sharing his story as a cautionary tale while emphasizing the importance of preserving wild spaces where apex predators could thrive. The moment when the grizzly's eyes locked with his became central to Caleb's recounting of the event. He frequently told audiences that it was like watching a freight train decide your fate, a phrase that would later title his memoir about survival and conservation. 10 years after the attack, Caleb returned to the Bitterroot Wilderness, this time accompanied by wildlife biologists studying human-bear interactions. His scars served as a permanent reminder of both the majesty and danger of truly wild places. The rugged coastline of Kodiak Island, Alaska, is known for its breathtaking natural beauty and abundant wildlife. In 2006, this remote paradise became the setting for a harrowing tale of survival that would forever change the relationship between Frank Mitchell, 46, and his 18-year-old son Sam. The island, the second largest in the United States after Hawaii's Big Island, had been home to the distinctive Kodiak bear subspecies, larger cousins to mainland brown bears, for thousands of years before human settlement. The Mitchells had traveled from their home in Anchorage for an annual father-son fishing trip, a tradition started when Sam was just 8 years old. Frank, a petroleum engineer who had lived in Alaska for most of his adult life, was experienced in wilderness safety and had encountered bears on previous expeditions without incident. This trip was particularly special, as Sam had recently graduated from high school and would be leaving for college in Washington State the following month. They had set up camp along the Karluk River, famous for its salmon runs and, consequently, its bear population. The river, winding through approximately 24 miles of diverse terrain before emptying into Shelikof Strait, had been a productive fishing spot for the Mitchells in previous years. On their second day, July 12th, they spent the morning catching several impressive sockeye salmon. They stored their catch in a cooler and kept a cautious distance from their campsite, as per standard bear safety protocols. Late afternoon found them wading knee-deep in a secluded section of the river, roughly 3 miles from their camp. The spot featured a gentle bend where the water slowed, creating ideal fishing conditions. Sam had just landed another salmon and was in the process of documenting their success with his camera when movement on the shoreline caught Frank's attention. A massive Kodiak bear, later estimated to weigh approximately 1,200 pounds, emerged from the tree line roughly 30 yards downstream. Wildlife officials would later determine that the animal was likely drawn by the scent of the freshly caught fish, secured to their wading belts. Frank immediately alerted Sam to the bear's presence with a low, urgent warning. The two began a slow retreat toward the opposite shore where Frank had propped his rifle against a boulder, a precaution he always took when fishing bear country. The animal initially appeared uninterested in the humans, focusing instead on scanning the water for fish. However, when Frank attempted to reach his weapon, the sudden movement triggered the bear's predatory instincts. With surprising speed for such a massive creature, it entered the water and charged directly toward them. Frank later reported to park rangers that he had managed to grasp his rifle just as the bear closed the distance, but had no opportunity to aim properly. The animal knocked him backward into the frigid river water, the impact causing the unfired weapon to slip from his hands and disappear beneath the surface. The bear immediately clamped its massive jaws around Frank's right calf, the pressure crushing through his wader boots and into flesh and muscle. Sam, witnessing his father's predicament from just a few yards away, made a split-second decision that wildlife officials would later credit with saving both their lives. Rather than fleeing, the teenager scrambled up a steep, rocky embankment that afforded him some protection, while remaining close enough to intervene. Grabbing his carbon fiber fishing rod, Sam began striking the water near the bear while shouting at full volume, creating a sudden cacophony of noise and splashing. The distraction worked momentarily, causing the bear to release Frank's leg and turn toward the new threat. This brief window allowed Frank to drag himself toward shallower water, leaving a trail of blood behind him. The bear, now seemingly confused by the multiple stimuli, hesitated, a hesitation that Sam exploited by continuing his barrage of noise and movement from his relatively protected position among the rocks. After what Frank later described as 30 seconds that felt like forever, the bear appeared to lose interest in the confrontation, and it retreated to the shoreline where it briefly stood watching them before disappearing back into the dense forest undergrowth. Once certain the animal had gone, Sam helped his severely injured father back to stable ground. The damage was extensive. Multiple puncture wounds penetrated deep into Frank's calf muscle, and the impact had fractured his tibia. Using their emergency first aid kit, Sam applied pressure bandages to control the bleeding and fashioned a makeshift splint from fishing gear and branches. With their satellite phone damaged during the attack, the pair faced a grueling 3-mile journey back to their campsite, where their emergency radio was stored. Sam essentially carried his father much of the way, a feat made possible only by the surge of adrenaline and their deep bond. Upon reaching camp, they successfully contacted emergency services. A Coast Guard helicopter reached their location approximately 2 hours later, airlifting Frank to a community hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery to repair vascular damage and set his broken leg. Though his recovery would take months, including physical therapy to regain full mobility, Frank survived without losing his limb. In the years following the attack, Frank and Sam transformed their experience into an educational opportunity, developing a wilderness safety program focused on bear encounter survival strategies for fishing enthusiasts. Their annual presentation at the Anchorage Outdoor Show became a popular fixture, with attendance growing each year as they shared their harrowing tale and the lessons it taught them. Sam, who had originally planned to study business administration, changed his major to wildlife biology and eventually returned to Kodiak Island as part of a research team studying bear behavior and mitigating human-wildlife conflict. For father and son, the attack became not just a story of survival, but a profound turning point that shaped their future relationship with Alaska's wilderness and each other. The autumn of 1997 brought unexpected terror to Cedar Ridge, a picturesque town nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. The region, known for its stunning fall foliage and hiking trails, had experienced a severe drought that year, forcing wildlife to venture closer to human settlements in search of food and water. Among these desperate creatures was a male black bear that would forever change the peaceful community's relationship with its surrounding wilderness. Cedar Ridge was established in 1885 as a logging outpost and later became a tourist destination by the mid-20th century. The town's 3,200 residents had grown accustomed to occasional bear sightings on the outskirts of their community, but confrontations remained exceedingly rare. Most locals maintained a respectful distance from the wildlife that shared their mountain home. Benjamin "Ben" Hardy, a 52-year-old retired high school science teacher, had lived in Cedar Ridge his entire life. After 3 decades of educating young minds about the natural world, Ben had developed a deep appreciation for the local ecosystem. Each morning, he maintained a routine of walking the forest trail behind his modest home on Maple Street, often collecting specimens to write for the amateur nature guides used in community education programs. On October 23rd, as the morning mist still clung to the forest floor, Ben set out on his daily constitutional. The path he followed was well worn, winding through a mixed hardwood forest approximately a quarter mile from the nearest neighbor. Unlike previous mornings, Ben later reported sensing something unusual in the woods, a silence where birdsong normally filled the air, creating an atmosphere of unnatural stillness. As he rounded a familiar bend near a small seasonal creek, the cause of this silence became terrifyingly clear. A black bear, estimated to weigh approximately 350 pounds, emerged suddenly from behind a large rhododendron thicket less than 15 feet away. Wildlife officials later determined that the animal was severely malnourished due to the drought conditions, with its ribs visible beneath its normally thick coat. The encounter offered Ben no opportunity for escape, Before he could implement any of the bear safety protocols he had taught countless students over the years, the animal charged. The initial impact knocked Ben backward onto the forest floor, driving the air from his lungs. In a desperate act of self-preservation, he curled into a protective position as the bear's teeth sank into his left shoulder. Ben later recalled to emergency responders that the pain was white-hot and all-consuming. Yet somehow he maintained enough presence of mind to evaluate his options. With his right arm still free, he managed to grasp a substantial oak branch that had fallen nearby. Using every ounce of strength he could muster, Ben struck the bear across its snout, momentarily startling the animal and causing it to release its grip. This brief reprieve allowed Ben to scramble backward, continuing to swing the makeshift weapon to maintain distance between himself and the predator. His shouts for help echoed through the morning air, reaching the ears of Elaine Woodson, a neighbor who had been walking her dog along a connecting trail. Elaine immediately used her cell phone to contact emergency services before courageously rushing toward the sounds of distress, her German shepherd's barking adding to the cacophony. The combination of human voices, dog barks, and Ben's continued resistance convinced the bear that the potential meal wasn't worth the effort. It retreated into the underbrush, leaving Ben severely wounded but alive. When paramedics arrived 15 minutes later, they found him conscious but in shock, bleeding profusely from deep puncture wounds on his shoulder and defensive lacerations on his arms. At the regional medical center, Ben underwent 6 hours of surgery to repair torn muscles, damaged nerves, and a fractured clavicle. The bear's teeth had narrowly missed his carotid artery, a fact that the attending physician, Dr. Eleanor Ramsey, described as nothing short of miraculous. During his 2-week hospital stay, Ben received visits from wildlife officials who collected his detailed account of the encounter. The attack prompted immediate action from local authorities. The Cedar Ridge Town Council implemented an emergency ordinance requiring bear-proof garbage containers for all residences within town limits. Additionally, they established a public education campaign about proper food storage and wildlife awareness, using Ben's experience as a powerful cautionary tale. 3 days after the attack, state wildlife officers located and euthanized the bear responsible, identifying it through DNA analysis of saliva samples collected from Ben's wounds. A subsequent examination confirmed their suspicions about the animal's poor physical condition and likely motivation for the unusual aggressive behavior. During his 6-month recovery period, Ben channeled his traumatic experience into a renewed educational mission. Despite requiring physical therapy to regain partial use of his left arm, he developed a comprehensive wildlife safety curriculum that schools throughout Henderson County eventually adopted. His presentation, Sharing Our Mountains, became mandatory for all students at the town's elementary and middle schools. 5 years after the attack, Ben published a memoir titled Lessons from the Trail, combining his near-fatal encounter with philosophical reflections on humanity's relationship with wilderness. The book received regional acclaim and established Ben as a respected voice in conservation circles throughout the Southeast. The incident fundamentally altered Cedar Ridge's approach to coexisting with wildlife. Annual bear-aware community events, constant monitoring of bear activity patterns, and improved waste management systems collectively reduced human-bear conflicts by nearly 70% in the decade following Ben's attack. For residents, the morning a bear sneaked into town became a watershed moment, a painful reminder of nature's unpredictability and the importance of respectful knowledge about the creatures with whom they shared their mountain home. A zoo in Innsbruck, Austria, has maintained an impeccable safety record since its founding in 1962. Nestled on the northern slope of the Nordkette mountain range, the zoo specialized in alpine wildlife and had become a beloved attraction for both locals and tourists. In 2009, however, this pristine reputation was shattered in an incident that prompted a comprehensive reassessment of visitor safety protocols across European zoological institutions. The zoo's brown bear enclosure, home to 3 Carpathian bears, featured a sophisticated double barrier system, an inner electrified fence surrounded by a secondary viewing barrier that kept visitors at a safe distance. The design had functioned flawlessly for decades under normal circumstances. What no one had anticipated was the extraordinary combination of human recklessness and unfortunate timing that would lead to disaster on September 15th. Emil Novak, a 42-year-old telecommunications engineer from Prague, had been visiting the zoo with colleagues after attending a technology conference in Innsbruck. Unlike the typical visitor who adhered strictly to posted guidelines, Emil reportedly displayed a concerning disregard for safety measures throughout his visit. according to multiple witness accounts gathered later by investigating authorities. The brown bear habitat attracted particular attention that day as the largest male, a 700-pound specimen named Bruno, was unusually active, pacing near the water feature at the enclosure's edge. This behavior drew a substantial crowd, including Emil and his colleagues. While most visitors maintained an appropriate distance behind the secondary barrier, security camera footage later revealed Emil's progressive movement closer to the enclosure, ignoring both warning signs and verbal cautions from nearby visitors. Katharina Weiss, a German tourist who witnessed the entire incident, reported to police that Emil had been attempting increasingly risky selfie photographs, each one placing him closer to the restricted area. Despite several visitors pointing out that he was breaching safety protocols, Emil reportedly responded with dismissive laughter before climbing onto a maintenance ledge marked with no access signage in 3 languages. The ledge, designed for staff use during feeding and maintenance activities, provided an unobstructed view of the enclosure but placed visitors dangerously close to the secondary fence. As Emil positioned his phone for what would be his final photograph, he momentarily lost his balance on the narrow ledge. Though he did not fall completely into the enclosure, he slipped down the sloped concrete surface. He landed in the narrow service corridor between the public barrier and the electrified inner fence. This unexpected human presence in a restricted area immediately agitated Bruno. The massive bear charged toward the inner fence where Emil lay stunned from his fall. Although the primary electrified barrier remained intact, the bear's powerful forelimb managed to extend partially through a maintenance access panel that had been scheduled for reinforcement the following week. Bruno's claws connected with Emil's right shoulder and upper arm, tearing through his clothing and into flesh. Although the bear could not pull Emil through the barrier, it maintained its grip for nearly 20 seconds, while zoo personnel responded to the emergency. Staff members acted with remarkable efficiency, deploying air horns and water hoses to distract the bear, while others accessed the service corridor to extract Emil from danger. When emergency medical technicians reached him, Emil was conscious but in severe shock, having sustained deep lacerations across his shoulder and upper arm, along with a fractured clavicle from the initial fall. He was transported to a hospital where he underwent immediate surgery to repair damaged muscle tissue and severed blood vessels. Though his recovery would require months of rehabilitation, doctors noted that the injuries narrowly missed critical arteries that could have resulted in fatal blood loss. The incident triggered an immediate investigation by Austrian wildlife authorities and experts in zoo safety. Their comprehensive report, released 3 months later, concluded that the enclosure itself met all European safety standards when properly utilized. The report placed primary responsibility on Emil's deliberate disregard for clearly marked safety barriers and repeated warnings from other visitors. However, it also recommended additional physical deterrents to prevent access to the maintenance ledge and accelerated replacement of the maintenance panels in all predator enclosures. During his recovery, Emil acknowledged to investigators that his behavior had been inexcusably foolish and driven by a desire to capture impressive social media content. His case became frequently cited in subsequent zoo safety campaigns throughout Europe, with his permission as a powerful example of the potential consequences of ignoring established safety protocols. For the zoo, the incident led to immediate modifications in all carnivore exhibits, including the installation of additional physical barriers, enhanced surveillance systems, and increased security staff during peak visiting hours. Bruno, the bear involved in the incident, was not euthanized, as wildlife experts determined the animal had reacted naturally to a perceived threat in its territory rather than displaying abnormal aggression. The event sparked renewed public discourse throughout Central Europe regarding the balance between visitor experience and absolute safety in zoological settings. Many facilities subsequently revised their emergency response protocols and visitor education materials, citing the Innsbruck incident as a turning point in zoo safety awareness. 5 years after the attack, a Pan-European Zoological Society conference featured a dedicated session on preventing similar incidents, with the zoo's comprehensive safety overhaul presented as a standard in the industry. The remote village of Sosnovy Bor in Russia's Primorsky Krai region had coexisted with the surrounding wilderness for generations. Established in 1851 as a forestry outpost, the settlement of approximately 500 residents had maintained a delicate balance with the diverse wildlife inhabiting the surrounding taiga forest. In 2021, this equilibrium was dramatically disrupted when the worlds of human civilization and wild nature collided in an unprecedented encounter that would become regional legend. The village, whose name translates to pine forest, was aptly situated at the edge of a vast wilderness that stretched unbroken for hundreds of miles. Recent years have seen an increase in commercial logging operations, pushing deeper into previously undisturbed bear habitats, forcing some animals to adjust their traditional territories and feeding patterns. The winter of 2020 to 2021 was particularly harsh, with heavy snowfall followed by an unusually warm spring, which disrupted natural food cycles for many species. Lydia Morozova, 45, had operated Krasota, the village's only hair salon, for nearly 2 decades. The small establishment was located in a converted residential building on Lesnaya Street, the easternmost road in the village, which bordered the forest directly. On the morning of May 12th, Lydia was attending to 2 regular clients, Valentina Orlova, 62, a retired school teacher, and Nadezhda Kuznetsova, 38, who worked as the village post clerk. The atmosphere in the salon was relaxed and familiar, with the women discussing local news while Lydia applied color to Valentina's hair. According to later police reports, none of the women noticed the bear's approach until it was directly outside the salon's front window. The animal, later identified as a male Ussuri brown bear, also known as a Russian grizzly, weighing approximately 650 pounds, had somehow navigated through the village outskirts without being spotted by the residents. Wildlife specialists would later theorize that the bear had become disoriented after being displaced from its territory by logging activities, with its movements potentially influenced by hunger and confusion. The women first became aware of the potential danger when Lydia's small Pomeranian dog, Misha, began barking frantically from his bed in the corner. Before any of them could investigate the cause of the disturbance, the bear crashed through the salon's front door, shattering the glass panel and splintering the wooden frame with terrifying ease. The sudden intrusion triggered immediate panic. Nadezhda and Valentina fled toward the salon's back room, which connected to a small storage area with an exterior exit. Lydia, demonstrating remarkable presence of mind, grabbed a metal salon chair and positioned herself between the bear and her client's escape route. She later told regional news reporters that her only thought was providing enough time for the others to reach safety. The bear, apparently startled by the women's screams and the dog's continued barking, hesitated for a moment before advancing toward Lydia. When the animal lunged forward, she swung the chair defensively, striking its snout. This defensive action, while courageous, served only to agitate the disoriented animal further. With one powerful swipe of its forepaw, the bear knocked the makeshift weapon aside and struck Lydia's right arm and shoulder, its claws tearing through flesh and muscle. The attack might have continued with fatal consequences had fate not intervened in the form of Sergei Petrov, a local delivery driver making his morning rounds. Hearing the commotion from his approaching truck, Sergei assessed the situation through the shattered storefront. He immediately leaned on his horn, creating a sustained, deafening blast that echoed through the village streets. The sudden noise startled the bear, interrupting its attack on Lydia. After a tense moment during which the animal seemed to evaluate this new threat, it turned and crashed back through the damaged doorway, loping rapidly toward the forest edge. Village residents who witnessed its retreat reported that the bear appeared disoriented and agitated, behaviors consistent with an animal under significant stress. Emergency responders arrived within 15 minutes, though in this remote region, the nearest hospital was in Vladivostok, over 2 hours away by ambulance. Lydia's injuries, while serious, were fortunately not life-threatening. The bear's claws had left 4 deep lacerations across her upper arm and shoulder, causing significant blood loss and tissue damage, but missing major arteries. During her 2-week hospitalization and subsequent recovery, Lydia became something of a local hero. Her quick thinking had potentially saved her clients' lives, and her community rallied around her with support. The regional government covered her medical expenses, and villagers organized a rotation to maintain her salon business until she could return to work 3 months later. The incident prompted immediate action from local authorities. Wildlife officials implemented increased monitoring of bear activity around the settlement, while the village council passed an emergency ordinance requiring bear-resistant garbage containers and prohibiting outdoor food storage. Additionally, the regional forestry department established new guidelines requiring wildlife impact assessments before approving logging operations near established settlements. Most significantly, the attack catalyzed a grassroots movement among Sosnovy Bor residents to better prepare for wildlife encounters. Within 2 months, nearly every household and business in the village had equipped itself with bear spray, air horns, and other non-lethal deterrents. The local school instituted regular wildlife safety drills, and community workshops on coexisting with large predators became regular events. 1 year after the attack, Lydia reopened her renovated salon with enhanced safety features, including reinforced doors and bear spray stations. In a gesture that reflected the community's resilient spirit and dark humor, she renamed her business Medved Krasota, Bear Beauty, and incorporated a stylized bear paw into her logo. Her salon, now a tourist attraction for visitors to the region, displayed educational materials about bear safety alongside its hair care products, turning a moment of terror into an ongoing opportunity for community education. Later on, Lydia's experience became the subject of a documentary titled Wilderness at the Doorstep, which examined the increasing frequency of human-wildlife conflicts throughout Russia's eastern regions. Interviewed for the film, Lydia reflected on her encounter with surprising philosophical depth, noting that while the physical scars had faded, her perspective on humanity's place in the natural world had been permanently altered. Despite her traumatic experience, she advocated for conservation rather than the elimination of bears, explaining to the filmmaker that the incident had taught her that humans must adapt to coexist with wildlife, rather than expecting nature to accommodate human expansion. The incident was a cautionary tale shared throughout Russia's Far East about the increasing challenges of coexistence between humans and wildlife as development continues to encroach on wilderness areas. For the residents of Sosnovy Bor, it marked the beginning of a new, more vigilant relationship with their wild neighbors, one based on respect, preparation, and the recognition that in the taiga, humans remain guests in an ancient wilderness.